and doctors who are assigned by the authorities. So with that, I want to really, I'm very happy that we are doing this, just the second program under the End Diversity series, which we just launched last week. But I would like to give you a quick gist on what really the End Diversity program is. End Diversity was really launched as a series to be able to end the twin epidemic of diabetes and obesity. Last week, we launched it with the internationally trained and experienced diabetes and obesity expert, Dr. Neeta Deshpande. And it was such a fulfilling launch that we had. We spoke about different aspects, and we announced that this initiative of End Diversity will be spreading awareness about the twin epidemic of obesity and diabetes and the strong relationship between the two. The idea is to get experts on panel to discuss science and research in the field. And we are very glad that both these international faculty today have chosen and agreed to tag their research and talk about it under this series. The idea of this initiative is also to derive solutions based on integrative healthcare approach, integrate the therapies to improve outcomes and the burden of the disease. Also to create strategies to prevent pre-diabetes to diabetes, obesity, and obesity. So that's really the idea. Recent studies have identified links between obesity and type 2 diabetes involving pro-inflammatory markers, cytokines, that is insulin resistance, deranged fatty acid metabolism, and cellular processes. Genetic or epigenetic research has identified over 40 genes associated with type 2 diabetes and obesity. Can prevention and treatment of obesity improve the incidence and care of type 2 diabetes, or is it just a fad to reduce weight? We will, of course, learn that more through today's lecture as well. But we believe that integrative and personalized approach is a key to success in a diversity clinic, which includes diabetologist, nutritionist, counselor, therapist, and of course, a lot amount of research, which today's faculty is eagerly conducting. In India, 80% of diabetics seem to have a obesity overlap, 70% of infertility cases are reported, and the risk of diabetes increases markedly as the BMI increases over 25. So that is something, is a published data we know. So this dual burden of this twin epidemic is not just this, but it is very multifold. Heart disease, cancer, fatty liver, depression, and now even higher mortality rate due to COVID is associated with such coexisting diseases, especially obesity and diabetes. And rightly so, we are going to gain knowledge on this today. Dr. Vimal Karani says that obesity and diabetes can it only be caused by unhealthy diet and lack of exercise. His and Dr. Prashant Kumar's input is that they are going to introduce to us this set of synthetic chemicals known as obesogens that we regularly, they are around us regularly in our day-to-day life, but we've never known about this terminology and how bad they are. These obesogens actually disrupt our hormonal signals and are linked to obesity, according to them. So there are more than 1,000 chemicals that have been identified as environmental obesogens, and exposure to these obesogens might also increase the risk of acquiring COVID-19 and of course worsening it as well. So let's learn about this critically new terminology and the research being conducted on the same by these internationally acclaimed faculty, Dr. Vimal Karani and Dr. Prashant Kumar. So I would really want to welcome both of them today out here. And before we jump on to really wanting us to, you would present to us and then we would actually throw our questions at you. I want to give your introduction to the audience here, and we're so happy to have you here today. I'm just putting these slides up here so that you can see how experienced and trained and knowledgeable the faculty here today is. Dr. Vimal Karani is actually an associate professor in nutrigenetics and genomics at the University of Reading, UK. He has been the program director for 4 undergraduate nutrition degree programs. He did his postdoctoral training at the MRC Epidemiology Unit, and that is at Cambridge, UK, and University College London, which is of course UK. He also received an advanced training in epidemiology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, with qualifications in molecular genetics, bioinformatics, statistical genetics, and genetic epidemiology. He has also published extensively in areas related to nutrigenetics, non-communicable diseases, and presently has more than 60 peer-reviewed publications. And for the viewers, having 60 peer-reviewed publications is significantly high amount of effort that goes into it, and it's very difficult likelihood to get all of them published. So faculty here is really in depth with several of these topics, and the journals that these publications have been published are Nature, Genetics, Lancet, PMJ, PLOS Medicine, PLOS Genetics. These are very internationally known and respected journals, and he's also written book chapters. He has received significant global media attention for his work on nutrition, lifestyle, and cardiometabolic diseases. He has initiated a large-scale collaborative project called Genuine, and that aims to develop a personalized nutrition program based on evidence from nutrigenetics, nutrigenomics, and dietary intervention studies using cohorts from various ethnic groups such as UK, India, Indonesia. You can see that the countries list is really endless. The other esteemed faculty we have with us today is Dr. Prashant Kumar. Dr. Prashant Kumar is currently an assistant professor at the SRM University in Delhi NCR, Sonipat. He completed his PhD in 2018 from the Department of Chemistry, University of Delhi. He has taught in various colleges and institutes, including Acharya Narendra Dev College, SGT, University, Kent. Dr. Kumar holds good expertise in organic chemistry and has worked extensively on metal catalyzed and metal free CH activation reactions, microwave assisted synthesis of biologically active molecules. With that introduction, I would want both of you to say a few words to our viewers, and then we would like to hear more detailed information on Obesogens. Dr. Vimal Karani, such a pleasure to have you again with us. We did have one session on nutrigenomics, which was really very appreciated, but not only by the general common people like us, but also a lot of doctors really love the content that you actually presented to all of us. We are really looking forward to today's session. Would you like to say a few words before we begin?
Yeah, thank you so much for a great introduction, and nice connecting with you again after, I think, after 3 months, I guess. Yeah, the time flies. Yeah, so and this is going to be a very interesting topic for everyone on obesogens, and it's actually not a new area of research. A lot of research has been going on since 1920s, but unfortunately, there hasn't been that much of research activities to address important questions relating to obesogenic activities of all these synthetic chemicals. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk today along with Dr. Prashant. So I hope you'll all going to have a wonderful time knowing more about obesogens. It's not just diet and lack of physical activity which is contributing to diseases such as obesity and diabetes. These chemicals and the environmental factors and the pollutants, they do play a very important role in contributing to these metabolic diseases. Over to you, Prashant. Would you like to say a few words? You need to unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Vimal. Thank you, Rajashree, for a kind introduction. So if someone asks me where we can find obesogen, the very short answer is everywhere in the food. Whatever you eat, whatever you drink, you will find obesogen. Today you will see how we day-to-day life we interact with the chemicals which cause obesity and how we get exposed with that obesity. And also you will see how we can avoid or we can prevent the exposure of that obesity and those chemicals who cause the obesity. I'll show you today. And of course, Vimal is going to talk today about the obesogens. He will just give you a very fair and nice idea about the obesogens and how the obesogens affect our health. Everything is going to be discussed today. I think everyone will enjoy and we learn a lot. And I hope everyone is going to be avoid all those chemicals in future so that he can keep himself healthy. Thank you.
Dr. Prashant, we have already started having viewers asking how we can avoid this. I mean, I'm seeing that in our on our social network pages already.
Yeah,
so
sure.
a lot of questions going to come to you. I think Dr. Karani, we would definitely want you to give us a good understanding of what exactly this obesogens mean, and what is the kind of research that is going on, and why do we really need to prevent them or stay away from them so that obesity can be controlled. And I do understand from whatever you've published that it is critically important, and this isn't something which we use in our treatment strategies at all. So, how can we start incorporating that? We would love to hear from you.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview about what are environmental obesogens. But before going to that, I would like to give a brief overview about my area of research, which is about the interaction between the genetic and the environmental factors in relation to obesity and related metabolic diseases such as diabetes as well. So I'm basically doing a global research on this particular area, and where I'm conducting the research activity in two different ethnic groups. Like one is basically focusing on Caucasian population living in the western part of the world, and where I've initiated this collaboration called as the G-Cardia collaboration, where I'm looking at all the cardiometabolic diseases. And to date, we have nearly more than 100,000 people who have participated as part of this collaborative effort. And we have data from various countries, such as the US, UK, and also from various parts of the Europe. And this collaborative effort has been supported and funded by the British Heart Foundation. And with data on biobank and various consortia-based studies, we have a data on nearly 2 million individuals. So we are carrying out these interactions between the genetic factors and environmental factors in relation to metabolic diseases. And we have data from 2 million people. And the other part of the study is being conducted in different ethnic groups from lower middle income countries. And that area of research is focusing on this genuine collaboration. And genuine stands for the gene nutrient interaction. So I've implemented these studies in all these developing countries. And these are some of the publications. So what I'm going to talk to you all today is we all know that obesity, diabetes are mainly caused by unhealthy diet and lack of physical activity, but there's something more to it, and that's what we're going to understand today. So to begin with overweight and obesity, what is the situation in India? You can see that nearly 73% of urban Indians are overweight, and nearly 50% of the urban Indian population is obese. So which clearly states that obesity is a very important problem in India, and also the recent systematic review meta-analysis has clearly shown that nearly more than 135 million individuals have been affected by obesity in India. So taking these into consideration, what are the factors that are predisposing an individual to become obese? So if you look at the etiological factors that are causing obesity, the first main factor is the unhealthy diet, and secondly, the physical inactivity, and thirdly, of course, a genetic risk plays a very important role. And then we have the medication use. The chronic medication use has been shown to have an impact on gaining more weight in those individuals who are exposed to such medications. And of course, during and after pregnancy, women, they tend to gain more weight. But also there is a very important component, which is the environmental component and or lifestyle. So that is exactly what I'm going to focus today. A lot of research on obesity has focused mainly on diet, physical activity, genetic risk, and medication use. But there is a very limited research that is going on in the field of looking at environmental factors and how these environmental factors can predispose an individual to become obese. So now looking at what is this environmental obesogens, they are nothing but the synthetic chemicals which you find in various things that we come across in day-to-day life. So these chemicals, they basically interfere with the action of the hormones. So we have several hormones that are secreted in our body, and the function of these hormones is to regulate the metabolic activities and maintaining a healthy weight. So if these hormones become dysfunctional, then the metabolic activity, the basal metabolic rate is affected, and that can result in obesity. So these chemicals have the ability to affect the hormonal regulation. So if you look at this snapshot of this obesogen, it clearly shows that the obesogens can increase the size of the fat cells. It can increase the number of the fat cells that are produced in the body. And secondly, it can affect the body's regulation of hunger and fullness. So whenever we eat something, at some point our mind tells that you the feeling of satiety, the feeling of fullness. So, but that stimulant is coming from the hormones that are secreted in our body. So these hormones get inhibited because of these chemicals, and which we call as obesogen. The way we call carcinogens as chemicals that induce cancer, or those molecules which are inducing cancer. Likewise, obesogens are basically chemicals that induce obesity. So they basically change the metabolic activity by storing calories as fat. So there are plenty of obesogens that have been identified in the US. A study has shown that nearly 80,000 chemicals have been identified. And of these 80,000 chemicals, several studies have shown that nearly 1,000 chemicals are obesogens. And these are some of the examples of obesogens, such as tributyltin and phthalates, organochlorines, organobromines, BPA, which is a bisphenol A, which is a very common obesogen, which is found in plastics. And where do you think all these chemicals are available? They are all available in all the things that we are using in day-to-day life, such as fungicide or herbicide or insecticide, pesticides, and plastics, in foods, in non-stick pans. So everywhere you find all these chemicals, and we are exposed to that on a daily basis. And what are these endocrine disruptors? So endocrine disruptors are nothing but they are again obesogens. They are chemicals which are disrupting the endocrine system. So they are basically harmful chemicals. They behave like hormones. So there are several hormones in our body. So you have different cells in our body. So these hormones will enter into the cell and regulate the cell signaling pathway. So these endocrine disruptors are nothing but these chemicals which mimics the hormones, and these cells do not understand the difference between the hormones and the chemicals. And these chemicals, since they are mimicking the hormones, these chemicals are taken up by these cells. So these chemicals enter into the cell and regulate the cell system. And imagine if you're exposed to these chemicals on a long term, your cells get tuned according to these chemicals and not according to the healthy hormonal production in your body. And this eventually results in the metabolic abnormalities, resulting in obesity and diabetes. As mentioned before, there hasn't been a lot of research in the field of endocrine disruptors, and this kind of an hazardous nature has not been adequately addressed by both industrial and regulatory science. But how do we prevent this issue? Let me give you an example of this bisphenol A, which is an endocrine disruptor. This chemical basically mimics the function of an hormone called estrogen, which plays an important role in maintaining the endocrine system. So this study was carried out in animals where they showed that treating the pregnant mothers, the pregnant mice with the BPA, that results in a generation of offsprings which had the altered glucose metabolism, and later in life they developed diabetes and obesity, clearly showing that long-term exposure, that is the prenatal exposure or early exposure to these chemicals, can have an impact on the development of metabolic diseases later in life. So how do we prevent obesity? So one step is basically to identify which are the chemicals that are going to have the obesogenic activity. As I said, there are about 80,000 chemicals, and only 1,000 chemicals have been identified as obesogen. So there are several hundreds and thousands of chemicals which have not been explored. If you look at a recent publication, they have used kind of a computer modeling methodology, looking at the physical properties, chemical properties, and the biological reactivity and structural properties of these chemicals to understand whether a chemical can behave like an obesogen or an endocrine disruptor. The first step would be to identify which are the chemicals that are obesogen. And the second step would be basically to understand the pathway, the biochemical pathway or the physiological pathway, how the obesogen can enter into the cell and how it can affect all the physiological activities in our body. So understanding of the biology is very much essential to target such obesogens. And the third step would be to carry out animal studies to understand how these obesogens are causing obesity and diabetes, because we need to understand all these three stages to develop a very effective approach, which we call as a green chemistry. I'm sure Dr. Prashant is going to talk a lot about the green chemistry because that's his expertise. But in an overview, in a nutshell, green chemistry is nothing but an approach where you can modify these all obesogens and all these chemicals, because each chemical has got a structure, and this structure is the one that carries a hazardous nature. But how do you modify the structure and make it into a safer version of a chemical? And that approach is what you call as a green chemistry. We cannot stop people from using plastics or any other wood products or any other products where you find all these chemicals. But one way to prevent that would be to change all these molecules into safer version of these chemicals. But how do we do that? One way is to do the collaborative approach, because I'm a biologist and I need a support with a chemist. So this is what I'm doing with Dr. Prashant. I'm trying to collaborate with Prashant and to understand how to evaluate the toxicity of these chemicals, because you definitely need a collaborative approach to understand how you can target these obesogens and how you can prevent obesity. And there are different funding organizations which have which are willing to provide funds to carry out such activities, because the whole idea is basically to prevent obesity. A lot of people say, like, I'm on a healthy diet and I'm doing a lot of physical activity and I have my meals at the right time, but still, why am I gaining weight even though I have low genetic risk? Well, the answer is your lifestyle, your exposure to these chemicals, your exposure to pollution. They do play a very, very important role in everyone's life. So this is actually the article that we have published in collaboration with Dr. Prashant and various other people from India. So this review will give an overview and insight about how the endocrine disruption is linked to obesity. And we have discussed the functions and the nature of several environmental obesogens and how they can have an impact on the development of obesity and diabetes. So I would like to thank all the genuine collaborators. And finally, I would like to show this slide because this is actually a very important figure that clearly shows the current status of the research area in the field of obesogens. So the pink square clearly shows that all the traditional risk factors for diabetes, where you have the family history, genetic risk, and obesity, lack of exercise, and unhealthy diet, all these are being studied and explored in relation to diabetes. A lot of research is being carried out. We have so much of evidence from these areas. but the evidence is very, very less from the area of obesogens, even though we have a lot of animal studies that have been carried out, but the data from human studies is very, very less. And that's exactly what is showing the current status of the research in obesogen. So the future research should focus on obesogens as well, taking into consideration of obesity as a complex disease, not just obesity, also diabetes and also various other cardiometabolic diseases. On this note, I'd like to thank you all for listening. And if you're interested in collaborating in the area of obesogens or endocrine disruption, please do drop me an email. You can see my email ID. So now I hand over the session to Dr. Prashant, who will give an overview about different obesogens and the activities of obesogen, how you can minimize the activity of all these obesogenic activities. So thank you once again.
Okay.
So it's over to you, Dr. Prashant.
Yes, Dr.
Okay.
Prashant.
Thank you, Vimal. And good evening to everyone. First of all, let me thank Rajasri, who has organized this live session, and to my collaborative fellow, Vimal. So I'm going to discuss about some obesogens, chemical synthetic obesogens. Let me share my presentation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. I think is it visible to everyone?
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to discuss something about environmental obesogens, basically some synthetic obesogens. Now, as you can see, Vimal has given a fair idea about the obesogens and how they affect our health and how they are important, how we should avoid these obesogens. Now, what are these obesogens basically? Obesogens are the synthetic chemicals that mimic the action of naturally occurring hormones. That hormones which are released in the body, they alter their functions and hence create various problems, including obesity, diabetes, other genetic problems. Also may lead to other issues like heart-related issues, cancers, and loss of memory. They can cause several problems to our health. So before I discussed in the details about the obesogens, let me drag your attention towards the 2030 agenda of UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now there is 17 goals, and if you see these goals, the one goal is good health and well-being. And I know everyone needs would require good health, and we can achieve this goal by combating obesity-related issues, keeping our body healthy, having healthy food. So now moving towards the environmental obesogens, there are a huge number of obesogens available, which are synthetic and naturally occurring as well. So here's some examples like MSG, monosodium glutamate, bisphenol A, phthalates, clozapine, nicotine, organotins, atrazine, and DDT. There are several environmental obesogens, and we call them endocrine disrupting chemicals because they disturb endocrine function. So starting with the examples, so first examples that I have taken is the bisphenol A. Now this bisphenol A, we interact it every day. I think everyone interacts with this bisphenol A every day because it is used for the production of polycarbonate plastics, epoxy resins, and which are used in water supply pipes, the coating of inside wall of food and beverage cans. Also, it is used to prepare the plastic, which is very clear and tough, and hence it is used for the production of various consumer goods like food storage containers, sports equipment, water bottles. Also, this bisphenol A, it is used as a additive for the PVC and PET. So you can see we used PVC made of the articles made up of PVC. We have a PVC like lunch box, water bottles, food containers, and also the cables and other articles we used in daily life. They are almost all these contains PVC. And now, how do we get exposed to BPA actually? Now, the major primary source of BPA exposure is the diet. Now, the containers which we used for the storage of food and beverages, they contains BPA. And when we provide some temperature, there's a possibility of leaching out the BPA into the food, into the containers, and hence we get exposed to that BPA. Also, air, dust, water, these are the others source of BPA exposure. Now, how this BPA affect our body? Actually, it alters glucose metabolism. It impairs with the adipogenesis and causes adipocyte. And also it mimics the structure and function of the sex hormones, estrogen, controls gene expression to influence bodily processes such as growth, cell repair, and fetal development. And the study has shown that BP exposure has been noticed in all age groups. So, and no one is, you can say, left away from this BPA. Now, how we can avoid the exposure of BPA? The best way to avoid the plastic. Choose glass instead of plastic to store foods, and never heat a plastic in microwave. We have practiced to heat, we just to warm our food in the microwave, just keeping it in the plastic container. So avoid that. If you want to avoid the exposure of BPA, please avoid the heating of plastic in the microwave. Or you can choose some alternatives like stainless steel, or you can use cast iron pans to avoid that exposure of BPA. Now, several BPA alternatives has been generated, synthesized, and in 2010, Canada has banned the use of this BPA in the baby bottles, with the concern that that BPA may leach in the food and that cause some hormone-related problems to the children. So then manufacturers have used BPS as an alternative, but studies have shown that BPS is also same harmful as BPA. And I must tell you, when you see some plastic with a tag BPA free, please use that wisely, because the chemicals may get into food and containers, especially if plastic is old or damaged. And if you see other, I have shown 5 examples here. Some of these alternatives are even more harmful than BPA. So the best way is to avoid the use of plastic and look some alternative source of this BPA. Now, just it's hanging out. Just give me 1 minute. I think this slide is hanging.
Take your time. No worries.
Yeah. Okay. The next class of environmental synthetic obesogens are phthalates. Phthalates basically are diesters of 1,2-benzene dicarboxylic acid, and we use this. Basically, we use phthalates in as an insect repellent for mosquitoes and flies. Also, these phthalates are being used as a synthetic additive for the synthetic resins to produce plasticity, flexibility, and to reduce brittleness in the plastic. Also, we use phthalates as a dissolving agents for other materials. We use them in adhesives, detergent, lubricant oils, automotive plastics, plastic clothes we used made of phthalates. Also, personal care products, which we cannot avoid at all, like soaps, shampoo, hairspray, nail polish, and perfumes. All these contains the phthalates, and we cannot avoid these. So we cannot avoid the exposure of phthalate. Okay, now how the phthalate affects our body? Studies has suggested that phthalates are likely to influence obesity through mechanisms like by anti-thyroid hormones activity, or by activation of PPAR receptor, that is peroxisome proliferator active receptors, which regulate the gene expression and metabolism, growth of development of body. So these phthalates affect all these parameters and hence create problems to our health. Now, how we can get exposed to phthalates? I have shown you some examples where we use phthalates, and some are very essential for our daily to daily use. Now, phthalates, we can get exposed to phthalates by eating or drinking foods that have been in contact with containers which is made up of phthalates products, because this phthalate can leach out in the food and water and environment. Also, to some extent, we get exposure of these phthalates by breathing in air that contains phthalate vapor or dust, that is contaminated with the phthalate particles. However, the exposure through skin is often neglected because of very low concentration and very limited absorption rate. However, free phthalate can be ingested by hand-to-mouth action. Now, the prevention is very essential. So how we can avoid the exposure of phthalate? It's very easy to avoid the exposure of phthalate. We can minimize it, but we cannot completely avoid the exposure. We can minimize the exposure of phthalate by staying away from fragrance, or we can avoid the plastics, use of plastic whenever possible, use organic produced meat, dairy products and foods, avoid the articles which contains phthalates, and the best ways to use some alternatives. For example, we can use citrates, sebaceates and phosphates, which are more safer than the phthalates. Atrazine, which is a herbicide used to control pre and post emergence broadleaf and grassy weeds in crops, mainly in corn and sugarcane, and while most commonly used in Northern America, is also a obesogen. And as per the testing of United States Department of Agriculture, 94% of US drinking water contains atrazine as a contaminant. And approximately 7 million people were exposed to atrazine between 1998 and 2003. So we have to be away from this atrazine. Now, animal studies have shown that long-term exposure to atrazine might contribute to the development of metabolic disease outcomes such as insulin resistance and obesity, especially when exposure is linked with a high-fat diet. Atrazine is so dangerous to both people as well as wildlife that it has been banned by European Union. Now, how we get exposed to atrazine? It can be absorbed into the bloodstream through oral, dermal, or inhalation exposure. And the basic symptoms of its exposure is abdominal pain, eye irritations, skin reactions, diarrhea, vomiting. These are some basic symptoms of this atrazine exposure. Apart from some serious issues like your cancer, heart-related issues, diabetes. These are some basic symptoms of this exposure of atrazine. And we can avoid the atrazine exposure by getting a drinking water filter certified to remove atrazine, or by using organic products. We can use safer herbicides such as sarpan, clisto, and equip for crops. And the best way, again, I will say, we look some alternative route. We should look towards the safer chemicals and safer procedure to develop these chemicals. Organotins also are known environmental synthetic obesogens. These are the chemical compounds based on tin with hydrocarbon substituents, and they are simply classified as, depending upon the alkyl groups, we can classify them monoorganotin compounds, diorganotin compounds, triorganotin compounds, and tetraorganotin compounds. Now, these compounds, they are used as stabilizers for PVC, biocides, and antifoam paints. Now, amongst various classes of organotins, particularly tributyl tin and to less extent TBT are active ingredients responsible for the obesity. You can see here, we can not avoid organotin. It is present in every article which we use in daily life. Clothing, school supplies, food wrappers, plastic toys, PVC water pipes, everywhere is present, these organotin compounds. So we can not avoid the exposure of these compounds, but of course we can minimize it, or if we can find some better alternative, we can also avoid the complete exposure of these organotin compounds. Now, we get exposure of these organotin compounds from seafood. And how from the seafood? Because these organotin compounds, like this TBT, it has been extensively used for the protection of seafowls from the algae and other marine products, and therefore has been largely released into water, resulting in adverse effect on aquatic organisms. So we can get exposed with organotin by having seafoods and by through contact with the treated products and by inhalation and ingestion of dust. But there is again a solution to avoid the exposure of this organotin compound. That is by minimizing the use of plastic and foam products, or we can use antifouling agents which are free from tin. We can use copper and organic compound based antifouling agents, which are best alternative to these organotin compounds. Now, these organotin compounds, they act as EDC by interacting with the transcriptional regulators such as nuclear steroid receptors, which regulates our gene and also which are responsible for the cellular differentiation, development, and metabolism. MSG, monosodium glutamate. This is also a obesogen, and I know everyone is fond of Chinese food, and who is having Chinese food, that person is having MSG, because it is widely used in Chinese food as a flavor enhancer, commonly used in the Chinese food, also used in canned bottles, soups, and processed meats. And basically, it is the sodium salt of the chemical that is amino acid called glutamic acid. That is a known essential amino acid synthetically produced by our body. Now, artificially, we can synthesize this MSG by fermentation of starch, and we can get exposed to this MSG by consuming the products containing MSG. And there has been growing concern over MSG being suspected as a dietary obesogen, which may be attributed to the altered regulatory mechanism that hamper the fat metabolism. And we can get exposed with this MSG and this consumption of this MSG has been linked to the itching, hyperactivity, headache, swelling of the tongue and throat. And after having the food which contains MSG, someone can experience its side effect within 10 minutes to 48 hours. But also, we can avoid its hazardous effect, or we can minimize it by drinking plenty of water every day, especially when we had Chinese food and the foods which contain MSG. Or if we feel some symptoms of this MSG, we should have water. We can avoid it by staying away from the source of MSG until the symptoms of MSG exposure subsides. And again, the best way to use some alternative, such as we can use sea salt, vinegar, peppercorn, lemon juice to enhance the flavor of the food. But there's one thing that is the ultimate, ultimate alternative to these obesogens, the use of green chemistry. This green chemistry actually the demand of today as well as future generation. We can see our environment is highly polluted. It gets polluted from the products or byproducts, gases released from the factories, industries. So we should think about something different, that is the green chemistry. And actually we should practice chemistry in form of green chemistry. Now, this green chemistry basically based on 12 principles developed by Professor Paul Anestus, also known as a father of green chemistry. And one of the important goal of the green chemistry is to avoid the hazardous exposure to the environmental obesogens by designing safer version of these synthetic chemicals. Using the principle of green chemistry, we can change the routes for the production of chemicals, not only obesogens creating obesity creating chemicals, but also the other chemicals also. We can create or develop a safer route. We should think about the alternatives of these chemicals which is safer, and that can also be done by following the green chemistry principles. We must adopt this green chemistry principles in our chemistry, or also whenever we think about the chemistry, we should think about the green chemistry. Now, Professor R.K. Sharma from Department of Chemistry, University of Delhi, has been playing an instrumental role in popularizing green chemistry in India, and he had developed or established a Green Chemistry Network Center in Delhi University. A member of GNC, we can work in the direction of green chemistry to avoid the exposure of hazardous substances. So, thank you so much for listening to my talk. I think now we will think about the green chemistry. We will think about the alternatives of these obesogens through the help of green chemistry, and we'll try to create better alternative of these obesogens. Thank you so much. And most importantly, I would like to thank organizers of Indo-UK workshop, Professor R.K. Sharma and Dr. Atar Matharu, who have given us an opportunity to establish a fruitful collaboration between UK and Indian researchers. And this is the workshop which is in which I met with Vimal, and we started our collaboration. And also I'm thankful to my university, Assam University, for extending all possible support for furtherance of research. And I'm ready to have any type of collaboration with the synthetic chemistry. In synthetic chemistry, if anyone is interested to have a collaboration with me, I welcome him mostly. Please you can contact with me. You can find my details on university site. Thank you so much.
Dr. Karani and Dr. Prashant, you were so extensively, explaining all this to us. And again, very simple words, most of us were able to understand what you were talking about. And I'll just request Dr. Prashant to stop his screen share. And then, I think we have a lot of questions that have come already for both of you, but how much amount of research and the green chemistry that you're talking about, Dr. Prashant and Dr. Karani, collaboration, when you said any sort of collaboration needed from our platform so that you can reach, you can do more programs anytime, we will be happy to do that for you, because this concept in itself is not restricted only to obesity, but so many deadly more diseases, lifestyle diseases, and autoimmune diseases is what I believe. And it's you are trying to promote this concept, and it is extremely important for us, for our next generations, our generation, for decades to come, because most important, I think, unexplainable reasons. We have been treating so many patients for obesity. We have been treating patients for fertility, and we can't figure out what is the reason. Everything is right, but a mother is not able to become a mother because unexplainable reasons. And we surely know that these are these hazardous chemicals that are constantly around us, and so many of them were enlisted by both of you, Dr. Prashant, such an extensive list, and I was very much listening into it, very happy to go back to chemistry days and trying to understand it in depth. But if you allow me, and unless Dr. Karani, you want to add a few pointers, and then we will go to the questions.
No, I think we can go ahead with the questions.
Yes. So I basically congratulate you for this great work that you're doing, and I'm so very happy to associate with you and to in helping to take this forward at all in whatever small or big way that we can. So there, very early on when we started the session itself, Meenakshi Sapru had a question. She says that I have heard about obesogens, but I want to know how to minimize obesogens. And I know, Dr. Prashant, you gave a lot of tips, but is there anything more you would, or Dr. Karani, when we talk about giving personalized advice to nutrition advice to people, what would be your advice? If there is a obese, diabetic, or any other lifestyle patient coming to them, what is normally your advice?
Prashant, do you want to start with?
I think, Vimal, I think you should start with that.
Yeah.
Because it is something I think you will be better to explain about this, because
Okay.
I can explain on the basis of chemistry actually, and as far as you go for nutrition.
So I think, if both of you can give your inputs as much as you can, because again, this is something which is completely into research. Whatever inputs you can give us will be helpful. And I'm going to shoot some more chemical questions to Dr. Prashant as well, but as much as we can get answers on.
Yeah, sure. So, if you go to any wellness center and or even a gene testing center, in terms of looking at weight loss programs, some of the information that we get from the patients or the even healthy people who wants to maintain a healthy weight and healthy balanced lifestyle, the information that we try to get is basically their dietary patterns, their physical activity levels, and what they have been eating and for the last 6 months or 1 year, and what could be modified to maintain a healthy life. But there is more environmental influence that is playing a role as opposed to just the diet and the physical activity level. So as part of all the lifestyle questionnaires, one question that needs to be included is, what is the exposure to all these synthetic chemicals? For example, if someone is living very close to a food industry or any chemical factory, what is the exposure to different chemicals that are used in that factory? So and also the rate of the pollution that plays a very important role in determining a person's susceptibility towards the development of cardiometabolic diseases such as diabetes or obesity. So that is something missing from our day-to-day healthy lifestyle questionnaire. So that needs to be included as part of the regimen. And that is my take on that. In terms of minimizing the exposure to obesogen, it would be much more better if it comes from a chemist. Prashant, would you like to take on this lead?
Yeah, sure. So I have discussed already during my presentation, the best way is to avoid the exposure of these chemicals. If we are not able to avoid the exposure of these chemicals, so we are habitual, actually, we cannot avoid the use of plastic actually. We, up to a certain level, we can avoid it, but on a large scale, we cannot avoid. So what we need to do, we should think about the alternative of these chemicals. As already we had words, Vimal, that we are working on the alternative BPA. If we are able to find out the alternative BPA, that will be very good for human health. Also, now as phthalates, I talk about the phthalates and organotin compounds. This can be avoided actually. We can avoid, like I told you that we have fouling agents, they are used as a fouling agents. So we can choose some alternative fouling agents. We can avoid that. So better way to avoid and to think about a different class of chemicals which will be the better alternative of these old chemicals. That is the best way to avoid the chemical contact. Otherwise, we will not be able to avoid this exposure of these chemicals at all. Alternative must be the better way. And it requires a lot of research actually, because we have to find out, first we need to find out the chemicals, then that we have to check their applications, whether they are equally valuable, suitable for that purpose or not.
So I love the idea that Dr. Karani actually mentioned that we should make this as part of our our protocol. The first input that we take from a patient itself, where we take the history, I think this should sort of become a part of the history taking itself, and only when we will be able to at least address all these issues. And we always keep having these confusing questions, and I am going to come to the plastic thing which Dr. Prashant mentioned, but I am going to first try to get some of the questions that have been asked. So, I think Dr. Prashant, you did mention about BPA free, and having lived abroad myself, this has been a concept which has been there for now almost, I would say about at least 10, 12 or more years, but has been fairly new to the Indian market. But again, when we say BPA free, is a BPA free water bottle tiffin good enough, or do you think that it is still better to avoid anything plastic? Especially, this is a very grave question. All mothers keep experiencing that. How do you send a water bottle which is not plastic? Because everything else can be of metal, but very difficult. And a lot of us, I've seen at least 70-80% of the people use plastic out here. So what is your guidance there?
See, as I mentioned during my talk, that BPA free means if we are using some bottle, some tag is available on the bottle that is BPA free. It doesn't mean that bottle of plastic is safe to us.
Yeah.
If they are changing BPA, they are changing BPA with some other alternative, which is some homologous of this BPA, either some BPS and BPF they are mostly using. But these are also same toxic as harmful as BPA. And again, if the plastic bottle is damaged and there has some issues with that can leach into the food. So if BPA free plastic is not a solution, the better way, instead of using plastic bottles, we can use glass bottles. Also, we can use some stainless steel materials, or we can use some cast iron based materials.
Yes.
That is a better way. Otherwise, BPA free means not safe.
Correct. So I think that is something at least we are these days a little informed about, and the more information that we get, and Like I said, I have really liked the idea what Dr. Karani has suggested, and I am going to suggest that to as many of my friends who practice nutrition as well as doctors who practice it, to include obesogens as a part of their history taking itself. That's going to be so much useful. A few more questions that have come around that is, so yeah, another question which is related to the BPA and the uh, type of utensils that we use. Is then our traditional utensils, like you said, steel, etc. Are they better? Are the copper and the we use a mixed thing which is
It's
called
mixed
tamba.
materials.
Are those much more safer than the plastic, or some of them are also questionable? What's your best take?
Yeah. Okay, if we go in history, past history, you will see people were much active and healthy because they were using the material utensils made up of metals like copper. They're using
Yeah,
using copper made metal, so they were healthy, more healthier than us,
right.
because they were not using utensils made of mixed materials, all that. Also, we can use. I know this is not in our practice, like mud made utensils.
Yes.
We can
Okay.
use that. That is the best alternative. And in the villages, people are also still using all these utensils. And if we compare our health of a people who is from village and one from a city, you will find the person is much healthier than the other one,
Yeah.
because they don't use that much plastic, because they don't use
Right.
microwave, they don't use that much plastic. If you'll go in any village and in any house, you will find all the metals, all the utensils made of steel, silver, or copper,
Yeah.
or you can find out the utensils made of mud. So we can use that. And also told you that stainless steel is one of the option, and cast iron is also one of the option. Also, you can use copper, and also you can, if you go to the market, you'll find the utensils which contains copper coating
Yeah.
on that.
Yes.
We can use that to avoid the exposure of this BP.
I think I am delving a little bit into this because there are a lot of viewers who would want to know this, and yeah, that drives our concept a little better. One more question which gets asked, and it has been asked even now, of course, after what utensils, and is microwave in totality bad? Because you mentioned that putting plastic in microwave is bad, but is microwave in totality bad?
Yeah, macro should be banned. See,
I know,
one.
because you're doing extensive research on it, and whom else could we ask about it?
Okay, now this question, once when I was warming my food in the microwave, and just I recollect that microwave use a microwave radiations which are harmful to us. If the microwave is harmful to radiations harmful to us, that we are the food which is exposed to that microwave, we are going to have it. All that food also will be harmful to us. So
Correct.
once I was thinking that we should avoid the use of microwave. Also, just compare the food, when just same food, one food you cook in the microwave, and the same food you cook in the onto the steel made normal process, and compare the taste of both those foods. The food which you cook by simple process will be much better than the food you cook in the microwave.
Okay.
Also, microwave radiations, these radiations can kill the healthy, you can say, species present in the food.
And those
So
good
I am
bacteria
in the
which we keep
favor
talking
to
about.
avoid the use of microwave, but to avoid to you can say save the time, we need 1 minute to warm the food in the microwave, and
Correct.
alternatively take
Correct.
much time, we use microwave, just take the microwave. But I am not in the favor of use of microwave. That is
Especially cooking
totally
should be
unhealthy.
avoided.
Yeah, it
It
should
should
be
be
avoided.
avoided. We should not use plastic in it. We, as much as possible, should avoid it.
Yeah, and the people has become so used to of this microwave. Even they warm their tea, they make tea also in the microwave. You think about
Yes.
that?
Yes, a lot we are used to, and I think Dr. Vimal will agree with me. If we live outside of India, then it's like life. How can you have it without a microwave? So totally true. But Thanks very much for those caveats, because we women especially have to remember that when we are cooking. But I'll now go actually to a more critical topic. And when you mentioned copper, it has been seen that these kind of metals had even during COVID survives lesser time on it. So that speaks for those metals as well. But I would now go to Dr. Karani to ask him that these obesogens have some sort of a correlation also with COVID. Are people more easily exposed to COVID, or is it that COVID can actually be more harmful to these if you're exposed to more obesogens?
Okay. Well, we do not have any direct evidence of the link between obesogens and COVID-19. But in one of my recent publications on environmental obesogens, I had come up with a kind of an hypothetical link or the correlation between the exposure to these pollutants and the severity of the COVID-19. So this was based on the previous outbreak of the SARS, which is a severe acute respiratory syndrome. We had this outbreak in the year 2002. And in 2003, there was a study that was carried out in a Chinese population where they found a positive association between air pollution and severe acute respiratory syndrome. So where the patients with this disease, those who are from regions with high air pollution index, they were twice as likely to die from SARS compared to those people who are from the low air pollution index regions. So this clearly shows that exposure to air pollution can have an impact on the lung-related infections. Even a study from the United States clearly showed that long-term exposure to air pollution can increase the risk of cardiopulmonary mortality. And all these studies clearly hypothesize that exposure to air pollution can have an impact on the prognosis of severe acute respiratory syndrome. And one thing, looking at the air pollution, you can see that the air pollutant has got this chemical, which is the nitrogen dioxide, which is one of the most important components of the air pollutants. And studies have shown a positive association between exposure to this nitrogen dioxide and obesity and increased cholesterol levels in humans. So, given that there is a link between obesity and COVID-19 and the chemicals and obesity, so I was hypothesizing whether the exposure to this air pollution could actually have an impact on the prognosis of COVID-19 as well. So that is actually the existing link between COVID-19 and these environmental obesogens. So maybe patients who are undergoing treatment for the management of the COVID-19, they should be placed in an environment which is less polluted, and that might be helpful for giving a proper treatment and preventing the severity of the disease.
Great. So some more questions up here, and of course, the first ones here is on MSG. Is are there any studies showing a correlation between MSG and obesity? Mahendran has actually requested a few references, so I guess maybe Dr. Shanti could share them with him a little later if you want, or if you want to add anything, you could do that right now.
No, I have just mentioned in presentation there is a correlation between MSG and that obesity.
Yes.
They are suspected to be obesogen.
Yes, yeah. Correct. So also Manohar Sivan has said this is a very informative session. Prakash Kondekar has thanked all of us for conducting this session. Question Manohar Sivan also has is, can you say something about the PCM7 and beta casomorphin 7? This is something I think, of course, a little technical, but if you want to add something out here.
It's for me, or I think it's for me.
Prashant, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I had not that much idea about these chemicals actually. So
yeah, okay.
Let's only can explain about that.
That's fine. And then
so what was the question about that?
So the question was, can you tell about the BCM7, that is beta casomorphin, which is actually present in the A1 milk, I guess. That was the question. And so I guess the viewer is trying to ask if this really could be categorized under obesogens, maybe.
Okay. So, well, the point is, we do have about like 80,000 chemicals which are present in the food and in all the things that we come across in daily life. But only 1,000 chemicals, 800 to 1,000 chemicals have been known to have the obesogenic effect or endocrine disrupting effect. So the chemical that you're talking about in A1 milk, that has not been identified as having an obesogenic effect so far. And that's exactly my point is. So we are using so many chemicals in daily life. We are consuming a lot of foods. And in fact, the dietitians are prescribing, consume this food, consume that food. So all these foods do have some amount of chemicals, and we do not know which are the chemicals which are having that obesogenic effect. So once we know a clear idea of like what chemicals are having this endocrine disrupting effect, the next step would be to apply the green chemistry approach. So the answer to that question is we do not know still. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely agree. I mean that we should be applying the green chemistry, and that is so much needed. I mean, we need to really focus on that. On that point, there is another question from Yasmin. She's of course also thanking us for sharing so much of knowledge. And her question is, she has two questions. The second one is more interesting. First one is, she says, does environmental obesogens mostly come from chemical exposure to food and drinking? How do you differentiate it with nutrigenetics?
Well, okay. Can I go ahead, Prashant?
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. Okay. So nutrigenetics is where like how the diet that you're consuming is going inside your body and interacting with your genes and altering your gene expression and contributing to the development of a particular disease if something goes wrong or if you're consuming unhealthy diet. So that is more about nutrigenetics. But what we are seeing here is instead of the diet, you are inhaling or you're consuming such chemicals, and those chemicals are going inside your body and regulating your gene expression, that is modifying your gene expression, and that modification of the gene expression will result in the abnormal production of all the proteins. So the quality and the quantity of the protein is defective, and that results in the abnormal functioning of your metabolic activities, and that is how it results in obesity and diabetes. So the term nutrigenetics is something where you're looking at the gene diet interaction, but what I'm talking over here is the interaction between your genetic factor and the synthetic chemicals, how the chemicals can modify the gene expression. So the only difference is you can replace a chemical in the place of a diet, and that is again like similar to nutrigenetics.
sure. So we do have one more question from the same person, and that's more interesting. Is let me read it out. She says, Yasmin again says that. What is the role of antioxidants in our body to prevent the long-term exposure to such chemicals? And yeah, of course, what is the role of antioxidants in actually negating the effect of these obesogens?
Well, it's completely two different areas, I would put it in that way, because like even if you're, that's exactly my point, like even if you're consuming a lot of minerals and vitamins and taking a lot of supplementation and consuming healthy diet, eating fruits, vegetables, and doing a lot of exercise and maintaining a healthy lifestyle on one side, and on the other end, if you're being exposed to all these chemicals on a daily basis, just imagine on one end you're having kind of a balanced lifestyle, on the other side like you having a kind of an imbalanced exposure to the environmental factors. So definitely that will have an impact on the health outcome. So the antioxidants, of course, they have a very good impact on your body, but there has to be a balance of everything in maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So that is very much important. So minimizing or reducing the exposure to such chemicals is very much essential. And on the other hand, maintaining or consuming supplementation and maintaining a healthy diet and doing a lot of physical activity, that is also equally important. So my stress is having a balance on both the sides. The figure that I showed you, we give so much of importance to the traditional classical risk factors of diabetes, but we try to ignore all these essential things which we consider as they're just chemicals. We have been exposed to all these the plastics and everything on a daily basis, but I don't think that's going to have an impact, and that's the attitude of most of us, and that is something that needs to be changed. And I don't think even though we have the government regulations of not using the plastic bags and avoiding plastic, but that is something like if you go into any house, you will find like one bag of all the plastic bags put into that. So that is something like has become like a routine and a daily practice that is everybody is following. So that needs to change. And of course, you cannot avoid plastics, and that's why we have researchers like Dr. Prashant, who's coming up with the ideas of green chemistry approach and trying to develop a new generation of safe chemicals.
Great. That, and then a couple of questions more. One, of course, then is eating organic foods. Should we actually be leaning towards it? Does that actually come very close to a green effect that we are talking about?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Consuming organic foods.
Yeah, consuming organic foods, are they the closest to our green revolution, which we are talking about?
Yeah, well, see,
because
eating
then
organic...
once people hear about these obesogens, then everyone will start, we all start getting into the fad mode of saying organic, and how much organic is also right is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, so consuming organic foods is important, but how we are consuming that organic foods is also important. If you're consuming an organic food in a plastic box, microwaving the microorganic foods, and again, you're still getting exposed to all these chemicals in different ways. So how we are consuming and the lifestyle that we are going to adopt is very, very much important.
Yeah, and then the source also where these organic foods are really manufactured. If they are getting exposed, again, the environment around is getting exposed. So all that is also very important. So I think, we probably need to go back to the farm to table concept where we actually grow it in our own farm and eat it. And which is what Dr. Prashant was saying, that, people in the rural areas are probably much more healthier, cooking in the mud pots, and that's actually much more healthier. Another question is also on cosmetics. I think the skin and hair cosmetics, especially those products, do they actually have obesogens? And because they also come very close to our bodies, and we could actually be inhaling these kind of obesogens.
Prashant, do you want to take?
Yeah, sure. I can take these questions. First, when we talk about the shampoo, perfume, you just look at the containers of those materials made out of plastic. We use plastic bottles to contain shampoo, perfumes, all that. So obviously, when there is plastic, there is obesogen. Again, we use chemicals to store, to manufacture cosmetics. Actually, cosmetics are also made up of some chemicals. They use some chemical process to make them. Obviously, as I mentioned, the case of phthalates, they are used in shampoo, soaps, nail polishes. So of course, we are when we use all these materials, we are close to the obesogens chemicals. We cannot avoid synthetic obesogens at all, but we can minimize the risk of exposure by somehow.
And then, one of the last two questions is one, of course, we spoke about foods and we spoke about how we consume them, but also water. Is there a way that, we can actually detoxify water before drinking it, though we may not be able to do that as much with the foods?
Prashant?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
What about water? I mean, we talk about foods, but also water is another component which we consume actively. Of course, water can help detoxify, but at the same time, how can we detoxify water? Because that also could be a source of these obesogens.
Yeah, see, we see that containers of water is made of plastic bottles, plastic bags we use to that contain that. And if you talk about the detoxification of water, by buying a bottle of water from market and doing detoxification of that is not a good practice. Just what we can do, we can use a water purifier. We can avoid the market water, so we can just use purified water we have at home, and we can carry that water outside also, but not in plastic bottles. We can use copper bottles. Copper bottles can be used to carry that water. And detoxification is not. I don't think we cannot make that in practice. Actually, we are outside home. We are just buying water. We are going somewhere. We just buying a bottle of water. And how we can detoxify that? That is not possible. That is not that much easy process. Actually, it's better to use some filter. Use filter water, which we and again same question. Filter again contains plastic body. There is also another issue. But again, I will compare with the rural areas. In cities, we keep in the summer we keep water in the freeze in a plastic bottle. But in the villages, people use pots of mud to store water to keep that cold. And also, I've seen in the cities also that people are criticizing that too. People are buying. People are buying that pots which are made of mud. They are keeping that at home to keep the water cool, and they are just filtering the water through RO and just keeping that into that pot. And that pot has some pore sizes actually that absorbs the chemicals and the microorganisms present in the water. So you can do that process. You can take that in your practice. You can use some mud pot.
So it is really going back to our own traditional lifestyles, which we have given up.
Exactly.
By too much of westernization, really. So it is that simple. Dr. Karani, would you want to make any comments? There's one last question I'm going to take otherwise.
No, carry on. We'll go with the last question. That's fine. Yeah.
So,
I think
the last question is, of course, a little unrelated, but it is. I think I'm sure you can take it because it's related to current pandemic situation. And Padma Priya is trying to ask this question. She's saying, what is the gene which stimulates immunity? Like how there is gene for fat, is there a gene for immunity?
You mean gene for immunity?
Immunity, just as you have a gene for fat, she says, is there a gene for immunity?
Of course, there are several genes that have been identified by different gene discovery methods like genome-wide association studies and candidate gene studies. And basically, like for boosting our immunity, like you get to see a lot of doctors suggesting to go for vitamin C supplementation, vitamin D supplementation. So all the genes that are contributing to the levels of vitamin D, all these genes are indeed immune-related genes. So vitamin D genes, vitamin D receptor genes, and all these genes basically, and also the genes that are contributing to obesity, any defects in those genes can also have an impact on your vitamin D levels and eventually can have an impact on your immune system as well. That's exactly the reason why you need to maintain a healthy weight to improve your immune system as well. So all the genes that are linked to obesity, diabetes, having an indirect impact on your vitamin D levels and various other levels of the markers or biomarkers in your body, which are linked to the immunity levels.
So I think that really answers a question which we all were also looking for an answer for. But if we are able to take care of these genes and more importantly the obesogens, and understanding that we have to keep our lifestyle diseases under control, and while we are trying to manage these lifestyle diseases, taking care of obesogens is also something which is a part of the lifestyle practice that we need to incorporate. Try to seriously think about some of these traditional methods which Dr. Prashant and Dr. Karani really took us back to, and also in the newer ways that, incorporating understanding of obesogens in our everyday routines is something which is extremely important. I can't thank you enough for giving such loads of information, and if and which way you are going to progress taking this research forward and more actively bringing in it to practice. And Dr. Karani, I already have a couple of ideas that I've thought through while through our presentation, how we can actually take this probably into a more serious everyday practice, at least if practitioners like us sort of start taking it forward, then and of course Dr. Prashant's contribution to our taking it further in a better way, and if we can also contribute to his research indirectly, that will be great. I would urge to the viewers who are here that like I keep saying, that our channel only tries to get authentic information from these nutrition stalwarts and also the health stalwarts. These two people really are so sincerely doing so much of research, which is honestly ahead. They are traditional equally. They are 2 decades ahead of what we are even thinking. So do take it seriously. Some of you, I did see a lot of scientific researchers which have also been attending these sessions, as well as viewers. Common people, you can urge your children to get into this kind of research, and the scientists here do take this up more seriously with both of them. If you can contribute to their work, this is something which is going to serve the entire mankind for a longer time. And we are seeing that medication is, of course, falling short. Nutrition also, to a good extent, falls short. We are seeing what's happening in the pandemic. So this was our attempt to actually exhibit the work you have been doing. Dr. Karani, I would definitely want you to say a few words before we close the program, and Dr. Prashant, you can also put in any of your closing remarks before we close this program. I promise that we come up with more, and that way we propagate our concept forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rajshri, for running this session. And I think it's a very important session, and people need to understand the significance of this exposure to all these environmental obesogens. As I said before, the concept of obesogens started only in early 2000, but the concept of endocrine disruptive activity has been there since 1920s, based on the animal studies in pigs and wildlife. They have clearly identified all these endocrine disruptive activities, but no one thought of like having a link with obesity and diabetes. And India stands as a diabetes capital, second diabetes capital after China, and one of the main reasons could be even the exposure to all these chemicals. So we should take this in mind, and of course, like we are all working towards developing a safer version of all these synthetic chemicals, all these obesogens. But at the same time, before we reach the level of preventing the use of all these chemicals, until then, we need to understand that we need to minimize and reduce the exposure to all these chemicals, and how to avoid plastics and all these chemicals, and whatever we could do from our end. So that is the take-home message from my part, and also for all the dietitians and nutritionists. Please do take this into consideration when you are trying to carry out your questionnaires with the patients or with the participants of your study program. So try to get information about what is the exposure. So include that as part of your a daily protocol in terms of your interaction with the patients at your clinic. And I'll hand over the session to Prashant, but I have one question to Prashant as well. Prashant, like you are a chemist, so how long do you think it's going to take to implement such green chemistry approaches? We are talking about like preventing obesity in near future using green chemistry. So how long do you think? Because one side is like we are talking about personalized nutrition, how to personalize an individual's diet to prevent obesity and diabetes. On the other hand, what you are talking about is how to prevent the use of all these chemicals by developing the safer version of the chemical. So what is your take on that, and how long do you think that's going to take?
Actually, the growth of green chemistry is very necessary to avoid all these chemicals. But this is not the work of a single person, actually. We need supports from outside. We need supports of almost everyone who is working in the field of chemistry. Because if you, as you mentioned, this 80,000 chemicals are known which suspected to be obesogens, because this is a huge library. And first we have to think about the alternative of those chemicals, and then we have to think about the green methods of that. So now presently to decide the timeline is very difficult. But of course, if we practice green chemistry, one day we will come up with the alternatives of all these obesogens. And again, I request to everyone, please join hand with us, join hand with Professor R.K. Sharma. You can visit on his site in the Department of Chemistry. You can become the member of his center, Green Chemistry Network Center, free of cost. Join with him, join us to develop green chemistry, to develop alternative routes of all the, not only these obesogens, but also for the hazardous chemicals, use of hazardous chemicals, solvents, all that.
Thank you.
Perfect. So I think that really was a very interesting session, and we will come forth with more sessions so that that will sort of get an answer for Dr. Karani's question, which was extremely valid. You know, we are talking about this, but taking it actually into implementation is what really will make the difference. So thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Prashant Kumar and Dr. Vimal Karani, for being here. Dr. Karani, it's always 2 decades ahead, like I said, with you, because all your concepts and research is much ahead of time, is something which I have of course realized, and there's so many valid concepts that you have been talking about and working on. So thank you so much for being on our show today, and we look forward to taking your work forward through our sessions. I would like to thank the viewers for always coming and encouraging. There were a lot of viewers in large numbers today, believe me. I think we've already crossed 5,000 viewers today at this session. And
that's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, a very interesting concept, and obviously everyone is very interested about losing weight, but you know, trying to understanding the science behind it, and not just obesity, but you know, how that will actually overall improve their health and the health of their generations to come, is a very serious topic in itself, and not just something fadistic, which I mentioned in the beginning, saying, is it only fadistic? No, it's so much deeper a meaning to losing weight and to stay healthy. I would take a leave viewers on this note with you by playing this small video of our sponsors, and also we will see you tomorrow with our other series, which is on robotic knee replacements with Dr. Ashish Arbat. With him also, it is very ahead thinking. He's always high on his technology and the newer researches that are going on, so that he can actually bring about knee surgeries and recover their patients very sooner, so that they can get back into action. We will be with him tomorrow, but till then, please take a look at this small video of our sponsors, who have always been, again, supporting us through our shows. And I would also like to thank Mahesh Darade and his team to always keep supporting us from the back end.